Today, 36 verses in the first chapter. So we've got 3 sections as usual. We're going to start off in the first one is first one is the largest section. So verses 1 through 20. We're going to see additional land is conquered. So context, what is the book before this? Joshua, okay? What happened in Joshua? They conquered the promised land. Not just land, but the promised land, okay? And now on top of that promised land being conquered, we're now seeing additional land being conquered some more, okay? So, I'm going to read through these 20 verses and we're just going to dive real deep in there, okay? So, now after the death of Joshua, it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, who shall go up for us against the Canaanites first to fight against them? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Behold, I have delivered the land into his hand. And Judah said unto Simeon his brother, come up with me into my lot, that we may fight against the Canaanites, and I likewise will go with thee into thy lot. So Simeon went with him. And Judah went up, and the Lord delivered the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hands, and they slew of them in Bezek 10,000 men. And they found Adoni-Bezek in Bezek, and they fought against him, and they slew Canaanites and the Perizzites. But Adoni-Bezek fled, and they pursued after him, and they caught him, and cut off his thumbs and his great toes. We will touch on great toes in a second, I promise. And Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings, having their thumbs and their great toes cut off, gathered their meat under my table. As I have done, so God have requited me. And they brought him to Jerusalem, and there he died. Now the children of Judah had fought against Jerusalem, and had taken it, and smitten it with the edge of the sword, and set the city on fire. And afterwards the children of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites that dwelt in the mountain, and in the south, and in the valley. And Judah went against the Canaanites that dwelt in Hebron. Now the name of Hebron before was Kirjath Arba. That's definitely not how they say it, but that's how I say it. And they slew Shishai and Ahiman and Talmud. And from thence he went against the inhabitants of the Debir, and the name of Debir before was Kirjath Sephir. And Caleb said, he smiteth Kirjath Sephir, and he taketh it. To him will I give Achsah my daughter to wife. And Othniel the son of Kenaz, lots of awesome names, Caleb's younger brother, took it, and he gave him Achsah his wife, or Achsah his daughter to wife. And it came to pass, when she came to him, that she moved him to ask of her father a field. And she lighted off her ass, and Caleb said unto her, what wilt thou? And she said unto him, give me a blessing, for thou hast given me a southland, give me also springs of water. And Caleb gave her the upper springs and the nether springs. And the children of the Kenite, Moses his father-in-law, went out of the city of palm trees with the children of Judah into the wilderness of Judah, which lieth in the south of Arad. And they went and dwelt among the people. And Judah went with Simeon his brother, and they slew the Canaanites that inhabited Zephath, and utterly destroyed it. And the name of the city was called Hormah. Also Judah took Gaza with the coast thereof, and Askelon with the coast thereof, and Akron with the coast thereof. And the Lord was with Judah, and he drave out the inhabitants of the mountain, but could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley, because they had chariots of iron. Verse 20, and he gave Hebron unto Caleb, as Moses said, and he expelled thence the 3 sons of Anak. Okay, first 20 verses. Big section. Already a ton of fighting. Don't know if you guys picked up on that or not. A lot of battles have just happened, okay? But what we're finding, in the very first verse, there's kind of this cry of, we don't know what to do. Okay? Now after the death of Joshua, it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, who shall go up for us against the Canaanites first to fight against them? So, in this period of Judges, the very first chapter, Israel's lost its leader. Lost their leader. They lost Joshua. Moses was the great leader used by God to bring them out of Egypt. Joshua was Moses' assistant and then successor. And he was the great leader used by God to bring them to the land of promise. But Joshua appointed no leader after him to guide the whole nation. So this is kind of crazy, right? Who's the president right now? President?
Sleepy Joe.
Sleepy Joe, Joe Biden, whatever you want to say. If Joe Biden dies, who takes office? Vice President. Who is it? Kamala Harris. If Kamala Harris dies, who takes office? Speaker of the House. Speaker of the House. Okay, you guys should know this. You are American born, half of you anyway. You should know this. Because I'd whip your butts in American history right now, that's not the point. So, but there is always a successor. There's always meant to be a successor, okay? And in this situation, you have Moses. Moses has an assistant, Joshua. Joshua dies, but doesn't appoint anyone to take the lead afterwards. Is that a mistake? What do you think? Seems a bit like a mistake, right? There's a big gaping hole in your leadership here. Who you're missing? A guy who can lead after you die. But the best part about this is that the Israelites asked the Lord. Notice they didn't just turn around and say, hey, we want to do this, so we're going to do it this way. They asked God, how do we do this? So the first lesson we should take from the book of Judges, 1 chapter, 1 verse in, is if you don't know what to do, ask God. Quite simply, ask God. He can help you, okay? God gives human leaders, amazing human leaders, to do his work on this earth. And when those leaders pass, it's always tough on us, but we should still ask God for guidance there. Okay? And that's the thing. Think about this church. Pastor Tom passed away, but there was an assistant, a person to take the reins in Pastor Josh. Okay? It's a good way to do this, but you also look to who God's putting in those places as well, okay? So, there is a situation here when you have the death of someone who has been so pivotal, so big. There's always going to be like heartbreak, there's always going to be loss, and that adjustment period. But there also needs to be trust. Do you trust who you're relying on to get you to the next place? Well, Israel is asking God that question. So clearly they're trusting in God to give them the right answer, which is good. So the book of Judges shows us a time that is sometimes confusing, difficult, dark in loss, okay, when you lose someone. And for some of those, some people have referred to the book of Judges as the dark ages of Israel's history. Like it's the dark ages because there's just no real guidance here, no real leadership. But the problem here is if we passed over this book, if we were just like, oh, it's bad, we don't want to read it. You know, sometimes you get to those books in the Bible and you go, man, I don't really want to read this today. It's a little bit of a doom and gloomer, right? But if we pass over this book, we neglect a really amazing, wonderful account of God's love, of God's graciousness, and how he lovingly corrects his people. That's a key part here. Notice, we'll read this as we read through the book of Judges. There is going to be discipline. There is going to be consequence. But it's coming from God who loves, not God who hates and is angry and wants to squash the ants. It's God who loves, okay? So, what we find out about man in Judges, in the book of Judges, is quite depressing. That we are easily pulled this way and that we are pulled into idolatry very easily, that we take our eyes off of God very easily, that we can be swayed very, very easily, that we give up very, very easily. What we find out about God in Judges is wonderful. We see the bad side of humanity, but we see the goodness of God, the guidance, and the continued deliverance from God as well. So, the great part about this, as I already said, Joshua is now passed away. The children of Israel are now asking God, who's it going to be? Who shall go up for us against the Canaanites first to fight against them? So they did the right thing. They asked God, they asked him for guidance. Without Joshua, they were left without a leader, but they were called to trust God. So they did. And God said, this is the cool part, verse 2, and the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Judah, anything specific about Judah that we know about? Go for it.
David comes from the line of Judah.
The line of Judah. One of Jesus' nicknames, other name, what is it?
Oh, the Lion of Judah.
The Lion of Judah. Judah's a pretty cool tribe to belong to, right? So Israel have sought the Lord. They've said, who's going to go up first? Who's going to lead us? Who's going to go first into this? And he turns around and says, Judah. Judah's doing it. the tribe that the Messiah would come from, should lead the way in this fight. What we see here, though, is Judah being put on the spot. Okay, verses 3 through 7, we can read about Judah with the tribe of Simeon defeating Bezek and their king. Okay, so verses 3 through 7, Judah said unto Simeon his brother, come up with me into my lot. So the leaders of the tribe of Judah, okay, they acted wisely here by partnering with another tribe. They weren't just going up on their own. They brought a second tribe along with them, okay? Makes work easier when you've got a kind of partner in crime a little bit more, right? I'm not saying they're in crime, but yeah. But the tribes function the same way here, that God wants the church to function. As a body, each part of the body helping out the others, okay? But I want you to look at Genesis 29, 33 to 35, because in this scripture, we can read that the tribes of Simeon and Judah were born closely along with the tribe of Levi. They were all born at roughly the same time, okay? And this could help understand why these guys worked together. Do you have a brother that was really close to you and you grew up with them and hey, we're only a year apart or something like that? I'm closer to them than it. That's sometimes the way that this works. So just a thought that Genesis 29, 33 to 35, if you want to check that out. But the Lord delivered the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand. So seeking the Lord, obeying his guidance, and working together as a body produced great results. Really good results. And their success was plain to see. The Lord delivered all their enemies into their hands. That's pretty incredible. The guy who was then put in charge to lead the fight, already bringing success. But who's bringing the success? The Lord. It's not Judah, it's not the tribe, it's not a specific person being named. It's God delivering those people to their hands. Really important to remember that. They cried out to God, he pointed them something. They cried out about what's going to happen, he brought the results through the people willing to do it. Okay? So they slew of them in Bezek 10,000 men. So the place where they conquered was Bezek. The leader of the city was Adonai Bezek, which means Lord of Lightning. What an epic name that is, Lord of Lightning. Like, what's your nickname? Oh, my Steam name is Lord of Lightning. You can see me on Steam. But this is an enemy with a very fearful name, okay? But Judah and Simeon defeated him because of what God did. And they found Adonai Bezek in Bezek. The word found in this verse isn't like finding them in hide and seek, like, oh, you found me. The word found is more like a hostile exchange. Like they found him on the battlefield. They sought him out and they found him. There he is, let's get him kind of situation, okay? The armies of Judah and Simeon didn't just stumble over Adonai Bezek in a hiding space in the closet. They found him right where they thought he'd be, in the middle of the battlefield, and that's where we're going to get him. And then there's this punishment that is pretty epic, okay? And that is, it's a little cruel, but we see some simple justice here as well. Verses 6, Adonai Bezek fled, they pursued after him, caught him, cut off his thumbs and great toes. Go for it.
Who is Adonai Bezek?
The Lord of Lightning, bro. That's what I was just talking about.
Yeah.
He's the king of Bezek. He's the guy that's in charge of this land, okay? So Judah and Simeon, those tribes, pursued this guy. He tried to run. They caught him and they cut off his thumbs. Okay? And their great toes.
Wait, so he is the leader of the Canaanites and the Perizzites?
Who?
Adonai
Bezek?
Yeah, that guy.
What do you think?
Well, I think so, because that's who they're fighting, right?
They're fighting the Canaanites and the Perizzites, so maybe he was a leader of that land in those areas. Okay? So, but Bezek was the kingdom that he was in charge of. Adonai Bezek was his name. They caught him, they cut off his thumbs, they cut off his toes.
Mine says big toes.
Big toes is better than great toes. I'm like, what toe is the great toe here? You know, which one has the most power? So big toes. But think about that. They catch him, they cut off his thumbs, they cut off his big toes. Why? Over.
I think it's because of your thumb you can grab stuff, and with your big toe you can run.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in England, after some wars with the French, they would cut off these two fingers so they wouldn't be able to shoot bows. So I think it's probably something to do with gripping, something to do with, but also in Africa, if you're caught stealing, what do? They cut off hands, they cut off fingers, you're marked for life to being something different because you did something wrong. Maybe there's something going on there for that, but we see the verse after, in verse 7, the reason that actually it's not as cruel a punishment, because the punishment really simply fits the crime. That's what Adonai-Bezek did to a ton of different kings. And he said those kings were under his banquet table and would pick up the food that dropped to the floor. That's how they would live. So he wasn't just like a ruler, bit of a dictator, clearly good at fighting. If he managed to capture 70 kings and had them on their hands and knees, no thumbs, no big toes, and they're groveling at his feet and eating the crumbs that hit the floor. That's pretty crazy. So you have Judah and Simeon taking over this place, bringing punishment to the guy that was trying to take over here and being there. And now he has his own toes and fingers cut off. They fought a battle in a territory that didn't belong to them. The city of Bezek was to the north of Judah's tribal land. So it was a trek, it was a battle, it was conquering. As we said here, additional land is now conquered. Judah's had its land placed. That's the bit they were given, and now they've gone north to conquer more land. Verses 8 through 20 are Judah's victories in the southern part of the land given to Israel. Okay, so 8 through 20. So Judah fought against Jerusalem and took it. So verse 8, now the children of Judah had fought against Jerusalem, had taken it, smitten it with the edge of the sword, and set the city on fire. So here it is recorded that the city of Jerusalem fell to Judah. It was pretty much occupied for a time, but then Adonai-Bezek was taken there and he died there, okay? Later on, we can read in Judges 21, actually, if you just jump ahead, you can read that the Jebusites take it back over again. The Jebusites that inhabited Jerusalem, and the Jebusites dwell with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem until this day. So they never took complete control. What was the big problem in Joshua, in the book of Joshua, when they were given that land? Can anyone remember? What didn't they do?
They couldn't finish out all the Canaanites.
Right, and they were like, oh, they'll be fine. Well, this is the problem here now. They rise up and fight back, or they rise up and they take hold of your culture and change your culture slightly and weaken God's power and God's might and change it to be different. All those things sneak in. It just happens. But for about 400 years later, in 2 Samuel 5, 6 to 10, we can see under the leadership of King David that Jerusalem is again conquered by Israel once again. So they get it, they lose it, and then they get it back again. But that's in a different book, so we're not going to dive too deep into that. But 2 Samuel 5, 6 to 10, if you want to check that out. So Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites that dwelt in the mountain and in the south and in the valley. Okay. Judah also conquered Hebron, and the city was given to faithful Caleb and his family. Joshua 15, 13 to 19. You can check that out. Okay. Hebron was the ancient city of Abraham, and the city was discouraged, which just discouraged the 10 unfaithful spies from taking the promised land in Moses' day, because the Anakim lived there. Can anyone know anything about the Anakim? Can you remember? Going through Exodus, they looked at one land, and it was a land of people, and the people were scary because the people were ginormous. They were giants. They were huge. And they were and that's Numbers 13, by the way. Numbers 13, 22 to 23, if you want to check that out. But basically, they were, the spies went ahead and said, those guys are too big. Those guys are too scary. We can't take it. Let's not go there because it's not going to work. We're not going to be successful. So the 10 spies came back and discouraged them from taking that land. We can see in verse 9 now a description of the land of Israel, okay? We can see that he had to went down to fight against the Canaanites that dwelt in the mountain, in the south, and in the valley. So in the mountains, or the hill country, which describes the region between Jerusalem and Hebron. Okay, there's an area there with tons of hillsides. The south, also known as the Negev, which is the area between Hebron and Kadesh Barnea, which is a random word, a random name, but you can look it up. Okay, and then the lowland, the south, the lowland, the valley, sometimes called the South Phila, from the Hebrew word. This is the region of foothills running north and south between the coast and the central mountain plain. So you can see that there's mountains, there's a valley, there's foothills, there's these little paths running everywhere that clearly it's been inhabited and taken advantage of, and people have lived there for a while now. There are these paths everywhere as well, okay? So what we see here is the tribe of Judah are just going for it. They went north, they've conquered. Now they're going south and they want to conquer some more, okay? And I think this is the part that makes me kind of wonder what's going on, like what the desire of Judah was a little bit. And I want to say that it's because they just got fired up and were like, God's told us to do it, so we're just going to do it. Because you see success in that first section, and then we get to verse 10, and it says, Judah went against the Canaanites that dwelt in Hebron, and they slew Shishai and Ahiman and Talmai. And are they people or are they places? What do we think?
Places.
I hope so, because it doesn't tell us anything else about them, okay? But in fact, it's like they went and they conquered and they conquered and they conquered. And it's one of those things I look at and I go, wow, these guys are really driven. All off of God just saying, you're going to be taking the lead here. God's authority, when given to us, means that we can do things that we would never really understand. That we've been given a chance here to step into what God's plan is instead of our plan. Okay, so crying out to God and saying, who's taking the lead now? That's a great place to start. Then acting on it when God says, it's this person. Everyone else around has to respect that and allow that to happen as well. Imagine if Israel was like, actually, we don't like the tribe of Judah. Can't Levi be the guy instead? Like, can't they be the tribe instead? And God be like, no, I've chosen Judah. And Levi then went and tried to do it and failed massively. Maybe that would have happened. You've got to have a respect for what God's deciding in these situations as well, okay, for his plan. But now we're going to get to Achsah, or Achsah, I don't know how to pronounce her name, Achsah. But she asks for a blessing, okay? So Caleb's younger brother came and he took the land, and he was given this lady to be his wife, okay? Lady A, I'm going to call her from now on because I'm getting the name pronunciation wrong, okay? So Lady A, she basically says to him, give me a blessing. Give me a blessing. You've already given me the Southland, give me a blessing. And this example was a good example because she was very humble about this, okay? She came to him, but then she moved him to ask of her father a field. She lighted off her ass, and Caleb said unto her, what wilt thou? She's on a donkey. No need to snigger about that, I know you would. There you go. And now she's asking for a blessing from him. You've given me the Southland, give me also springs of water. And Caleb gave her the upper springs and the nether springs, okay? This is an ask for a blessing from her new husband. This is for better land. This is for an opportunity for the land to flourish as well. Wherever water is, you get life. Everyone knows that, right? It's a good thing to have in your land. If you've got sheep and goats and cows and all that stuff, what do you want near it? A river, water source, so they can drink. You know they're going to be taken care of. Verse 16, I'm going to jump up to there. And the children of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up out of the city of palm trees with the children of Judah into the wilderness of Judah, which lieth in the south of Arad. And they went and dwelt among the people. Okay. The city of palms was a different name, another name for the city of, anyone know?
Is it Jerusalem?
Starts with a J, close. The walls came crumbling down. Yeah, Jericho, there it is right there. So then it was another name for the city of Jericho, okay? The Kenites were there from there to Arad, a city out in the Judean wilderness, west of Masada, and the Dead Sea. Okay, so the best part about the Bible is it tells you all these places. It tells you of all these things, and it kind of helps you really picture what's happening here. They went to the south of Arad, and they went and dwelt among the people, and Judah went with Simeon his brother, and they slew the Canaanites that inhabited Zephath and utterly destroyed it. And the name of the city was called Hormah. So Zephath was, I'm saying that wrong as well, by the way, it isn't too far away from Arad. And Gaza and Ashkelon, there's actually two places there in verses 18. They also took Gaza, the coast thereof, and Askelon with the coast thereof. Later on become Philistine strongholds. We know that Gaza does, and we know that that's mentioned in Samuel as well, in the books of Samuel there. Verse 19, and the Lord was with Judah. So remember what I said, the drive that he had? He's with him. He's pushed, like the tribe of Judah is being fired up here by God. And he's just saying, you have the authority to go and do and be and go forward, right? And he drove out the inhabitants of the mountain, but could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley, because they had chariots of iron. Judah's victory was impressive. The north, the south are now trying to conquer each section of this until you realize it was incomplete. Another time that they've been trying to do a task, leaving it 99% done. 99.9 is not 100%. If God asks you to do something, we hammered this in Joshua, okay? I don't know if you guys can remember this, but we hammered this in Joshua. We said, not completing the task that God's given you isn't good. You need to finish the job. But they could not defeat nations that had the latest military technology. What was that military technology?
Chariots with iron.
Chariots of iron. These big, incredibly bulky things, powerful things. That would have been scary. And they come up against these chariots of iron and they get scared and they can't complete the task. So this speaks again about a lack of full trust in God. Because remember what happened in Joshua. When the kings came up against the nation of Israel and they said, we need to stop them, and we're going to embank on this river, and we're going to have all our chariots and all our horses and all our spears and all our swords and all our shields and all those things that we have, the nation of Israel have nothing compared to we have. And it said the amount of their armies numbered more than the sand. And Joshua and the nation of Israel took it, and they destroyed everyone. And now you jump forward maybe 10 chapters into a new book, and they have this fear of defeat. Joshua's not been dead that long. And it seems like they've kind of forgotten what God did back then, because they haven't had a guy reminding them. Chariots were no problems for God's people when they were trusting God. Exodus 14, 7 to 29. Check that out. It's a big section right there. Joshua 11, 1 to 8. That's the section I was just talking to you about. And 1 Kings 20, 21. So their attitude should have been like those before. It should have reflected it. Psalm 20, verse 7 says, some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. They should have been there, remembering the name of the Lord our God. But instead they were looking at what was in front of them. And the Lord was with Judah, and he drove out the inhabitants of the land, but could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley, because they had chariots of iron. And he gave Hebron unto Caleb, as Moses said, and his expelled thence the sons of Anak. Who are the sons of Anak? Anyone got any ideas there? They were pretty big guys. Pretty big guys, okay? They were large men, they were fierce warriors. You can look at Numbers 13:33 and Deuteronomy 9:2. But with God's help, Caleb defeated them, and that's in the account of Joshua 15, 13 and 14, about when he defeated them there. So he expelled them from there, that place that they were living. Okay? Again, a great victory, but not complete. Which gets us to section 2. Incomplete victory and defeat. Verses 21 and 26. So, and the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites that inhabited Jerusalem, but the Jebusites dwell with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem unto this day. And the house of Joseph, they also went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. And the house of Joseph was sent to describe Bethel. Now the name of the city was Luz. And the spies saw a man come forth out of the city, and they said unto him, Show us, we pray thee, the entrance into the city, and we will show thee mercy. And he showed them the entrance to the city. They smote the city with the edge of the sword, but they let go the man and all his family. And the man went into the land of the Hittites and built a city, and called the name thereof Luz, which is the name thereof unto this day. Okay, incomplete victory and defeats. The tribe of Benjamin, verse 21, does not take possession of Jerusalem. They did not drive out the Jebusites that inhabited Jerusalem. This is a case where, back in Judges 1:8, that the battle had already been done. They just didn't complete the job. The battle was won, but it wasn't completed because the Jebusites were not taken out, okay? Jerusalem should have belonged to them. So the Jebusites dwell with the children of Benjamin unto this day. Again, do we know that they to this day, or are they on about the scroll day? Probably the same thing, right? So, yeah, up until the time of the writer of the book of Judges. That's what I have in my notes right here, potentially. So, the tribe of Benjamin failed to cast out the Jebusites and therefore lived in constant military and spiritual danger. Maybe even more so the spiritual danger. Because they had a tribe all around them ready to pounce and kill these guys if they really wanted to. But spiritually, that city was never theirs fully. That means people were celebrating idolatry, worshipping other gods, inviting that culture to challenge their culture. So there was a real battle inside the battle going on here, okay? Verses 22 to 26, the house of Joseph conquers the city of Bethel. And they use this same technique that we've seen before. Let's look at this. The spies saw a man come forth out of the city, and they said unto him, Show us, we pray, the entrance into the city, and we'll show you mercy. And when he showed them the entrance to the city, they smote the city with the edge of the sword, but they let the man and his people go. Where did we see this happen before? Rahab. Yeah? And they're saying, go view the land, even Jericho. You are right. But they're using the same technique that they used with Rahab. Save us, and we'll show you mercy. Show us the way in and we'll show you mercy. This technique worked before, it'll work again. And it did. And it did. It's kind of funny. The Lord was with them. We credit the victory to God. But even though there's the same technique being used, there's human technique being used here, it is still God's victory. Because God was with them. And we can read that, okay? That God was with them as they went in there, okay? And they let this man and the people go. And they seem to use the events surrounding Rahab and the conquering of Jericho as a pattern, and a successful pattern. Why fix it if it's not broken? This worked before, it'll work again. And sure enough, God was with them and it worked again. That's pretty awesome. Final section right here. 27 to 36, some land is not conquered. So we have additional land is conquered, incomplete victory and a defeat, and then some land is not conquered, okay? So, 27 to 29, neither did Manasseh drive out the inhabitants of Bethshean and her towns, nor Tanakh and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Dor and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Ibleam and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Megiddo and her towns, but the Canaanites would dwell in that land. And it came to pass, when Israel was strong, that they put the Canaanites to tribute, and did not utterly drive them out. Neither did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites that dwelt in Gezer, but the Canaanites dwelt in Gezer among them. Neither did Zebulun drive out the inhabitants of Kitron, nor the inhabitants of Nahalol, but the Canaanites dwelt among them and became tributaries. That's a dangerous thing right there. Neither did Asher drive out the inhabitants of Akko, nor the inhabitants of Zidon, nor of Alab, nor of Akzib, nor of Helba, nor of Athik, nor of Rehob. By the way, these names are really hard to pronounce. But the Asherites dwelt among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. Neither did Naphtali drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh, nor the inhabitants of Beth-Anan, but he dwelt among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land. Nevertheless, the inhabitants of Beth-Shemesh and of Beth-Anan became tributaries unto them. And the Amorites forced the children of Dan into the mountain, for they would not suffer them to come down to the valley. But the Amorites would dwell in Mount Heres, in Ajalon, and in Shaalbim. Yet the land of the house of Joseph prevailed, so they became tributaries. and the coast of the Amorites was from the going up to Akrabim, from the rock and upward. There is a lot of town names. Look at the maps. Look at the maps. I tried to find a good map to put up on here. Some of them are really good quality, some of them are just not. But the best ones you're going to find is just look in the back of your Bible. If you've got a good study Bible, they will have lots of maps like this in there. If you don't have a good study Bible, you can look at one of ours later on. But the whole point about this here is land is not conquered, because you know what? The bad guys just didn't budge. The ones they were meant to conquer did not leave. They couldn't do it. So the Canaanites would dwell in that land, were determined to dwell in the land. At first, there were pockets of Canaanites that these tribes were not able to push out. They were so embedded, they were strong, they were just locked down, they were just not going to get rid of them. But when the tribes eventually grow strong enough, they compromised with these Canaanites. And they thought they could use them to their advantage. Those tributaries are basically saying, you're being under tribute. You will work with us, you will work for us, and you can live here. So what we're seeing here is God saying, hey, you need to take control of this whole land. You need to make this promised land yours. And what they're saying is, hey, we're going to work with the bad guys in this situation. That's not right. That's not the way it should be. The good guy doesn't work with the bad guy to win the day. The good guy has to conquer the bad guy. But they did not completely drive them out, and that's the problem. Okay? It came to pass when Israel was strong that they put the Canaanites to tribute and did not utterly drive them out. In the same way, when someone first becomes a Christian, right, they may not be strong enough in the Lord to deal with all the things they see that need changing. There's lots of things that happen in our hearts that need to be addressed. You know, greed or lifestyle changes or anything like that, selfishness, whatever it is, lusting after things. When you become a brand new baby Christian, it's really hard for you to understand what needs to be changed. But once you grow in God, and once you start to grow in God, there's not an area that God cannot change in you. It's your faith that allows you to better get there. We're not meant to make a peace treaty with our sins, is what I'm trying to say here. We're not trying to make a contract with them and saying, hey, you can live in my heart as long as you don't take over. You're meant to disconnect from them. Those sins are not meant to be in your life. When God takes charge, he drives out, right? He tells them to take over. You are not perfect. You're not perfect people. You're not perfect Christians if you are allowing sin to be in our hearts. And that's for everyone. That's for every single person in this room, in the world, anywhere, sitting in a church and you're saying, hey, I'm a perfect little Christian. It's like, no, you're not. Because we've all made contracts somewhere, or a little peace treaty somewhere with sins, saying, you can stay here, you're fine. You're just a little guy. That little guy doesn't stay little. Sin grows. It's like a cancer. It takes over. We need to cut it out. We need to take over. We need to drive it out of our hearts. Who needs to do that? Who can do that? Only God. It's not on us. We can't do that ourselves, okay? And we see that. It's a funny illustration, but it's the same thing that's happening here. God has given them the authority to take over the land, and they are compromising with that. They're allowing that idol worship, that different culture, the different understanding of who God is, the ridiculing of God to stay. It's like they're making a peace treaty with sin. Okay. Verse 30, the tribe of Zebulun compromises and accommodates the Canaanites and puts them under tribute as well. So, nor did Zebulun drive out the inhabitants, okay, and the Canaanites dwelt among them and became tributaries. Each tribe had its own responsibility. We read that in Joshua. This isn't a new thing. They all had that land that they had to take over and make their own, right? But all of them are not doing that job. Each tribe had its own responsibility, its own battles to fight, and this particular battle, the tribe of Zebulun failed to take all that God had portioned for them. So the Canaanites stayed there and were put under tribute again. People of Zebulun thought they could make their incomplete obedience work to their advantage. When God's asked you to do something, you're meant to do it. They failed to appreciate that the Canaanites who dwelt among them would eventually bring them into social and spiritual crisis. We're going to read later on how all these tribes fall. Basically, every single one of them fall for idolatry worship at some point, or going in a different direction, or deciding to, hey, you know what, God, wait right here. We're just going to go and check out this God, and we'll be right back. It happens, and it's sad, but it happens to us as well. How often do we put something in front of God? Verses 31 and 32, the tribe of Asher fails in taking full possession of their land. And again, it's the same thing that happens again. Verse 33, the tribe of Naphtali compromises and accommodates the Canaanites and puts them under tribute as well. It's tough because you look at it and you go, wow, you fail. Why? Because they were just not trusting in what God was going to do here. Verse 34 to 36, the tribe of Dan fails in taking full possession of their land as well. So, we see here, there's a lot of failures. The people of God are being pushed around by their enemies. And that should never be the case when God's people are walking in the strength of God. What happened right in the very beginning? Additional land is conquered because God was with them and they had the authority and they walked in that authority. As soon as you start walking in your own strength, that's when we fail. That's when we fail. And in life, if I'm walking in God's strength, boy, that's unstoppable. But that's not because of Jamie, that's because of God. Once they started doing it in their own strength, that's when these things start to fall down. Instead of doing what God said should have been done with these enemies, to completely drive them out, they decided to use them as they thought best and put all of these people under tribute. We will use them to better our lives right now. Instead of having a complete promised land that was completely theirs, that God had promised them, that had said it would be yours, they decided, we'll compromise. You can have the whole house, but you're not allowed the kitchen because the cook likes to sleep in there. If you go in the kitchen, you might have problems. That would be awkward, right? Hey, you're just purchasing this new home and you go in and go, yeah, everyone but the master bedroom. You're not allowed to go in there because that's going to be owned by someone else. That's not your whole house then, is it? You're sharing it with someone else. That makes things awkward. Especially when you shouldn't be, when you should own the whole place. Makes sense, right? So, we see in the end result of all of this, different tribes, different Canaanite tribes there have boundaries with the inheritance of God's people. Little places within God's people's places, right? And that is the same situation that happens with us. When we don't give God everything, sin creeps in and takes places in our hearts, homes in our hearts, so areas in our hearts, okay? We need to give everything to God and allow Him to do what He's going to do there. Not just what we want to do. He's given us the authority to walk in Him, so we should be walking in His strength and not our own. Does that make sense? Slow nod from Grace. That's good. I appreciate it. Okay, 3 final thoughts and we'll finish up here, okay? So in times of trouble, where are you turning? The Israelites did a good job. Their leader was gone. Joshua was dead. Moses is long gone. But now they're in the promised land. Where do you turn in times of trouble? They chose to turn to God. Instead of themselves, they turned to Him and said, who should lead? Where are you turning? Are you turning to God for those decisions, or are you making them on your own? When times get tough, when you have this tough decision to make, who are you turning to for answers? God should be that place. That should be the place that you're turning to, okay? Second thought here, the importance of the tribe of Judah. We see this tribe separated and put in a place of importance here. And we've mentioned it before. David, the Messiah, Jesus Christ coming from that line. The tribe of Judah is important. I kind of like seeing how they play out for the rest of the Bible, but it's an incredible way to see that, okay? And the third one here, patterns are similar. Failing in God's plan isn't good, okay? That is an understatement. These patterns are shown time and time again. When you don't give everything to God, that means you're holding something back. And when you hold something back, that means you're vulnerable. You're vulnerable to attack. You're vulnerable to sin creeping in because you're not giving God everything. And guys, that is really tough. To turn around and say, God, you get 100% of me. All of me is yours. None of me is mine anymore. It's all you. That is a really tough thing to do. But when you do that, you're saying to God, I want you to get rid of everything that's not welcome here. I want you to get rid of all the sin, all the guilt, all the shame, all those things wrong. Get rid of it all. And that's what we're talking about here. The tribes of Joshua, we read of all the different tribes throughout the book of Joshua, throughout the book of Judges. They do not inhabit the whole land. That means they can't get rid of those things that are going to cause them to stumble later on. That little bit of sin that you don't let God take care of, it grows into a cancer. It goes into something worse. A weed, something that will trip you up, something that will get a grip on you, and it will hold you back. I pray for young people every day that they'll give God everything. But it's such a hard thing to say and a hard thing to do. Because what you're saying there is you're saying that, God, I trust you to be completely responsible for everything in my life. I tell you guys, as a teenager, when I was a teenager and I got asked this question of, do you give God everything? My answer was no. I had a box for Christian stuff. I had a box for school stuff. I had a box for home stuff. And it was really tough keeping it all separate until one day they all just got mashed up together because it's really hard to live that way. You have a great opportunity. Giving God everything right now for the rest of your life. You'll see the blessings. You'll see what He's got planned for you. But I promise you, we all struggle with these things. This is not something that is like a small thing. But the pattern is there. Don't let this be a pattern that reoccurs in your life where you say, I'm going to give God 75% or half or just 10%. Give God everything as much as you can. And see what He's got in store for you, because then you'll see the blessings that God has in your life, okay? Make sense? A little bit of a rant there. Sorry, I apologize. But that's Judges chapter 1.